Hey, I'm Doug. Welcome to Camino 2020, a section of my channel devoted to my preparations for walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain next year. And today I want to talk about the ultimate Camino Indulgence. No, I'm not talking about this or this. I'm talking about this. And I especially want to clear up some confusion regarding the Camino Indulgence, namely that there even is one. Alright, before we get to the alleged Camino Indulgence, we need to find out what indulgences are to begin with. And so for that, I've got my handy Catholic Catechism right here, and it reads, "An indulgence is a remission before God of the temporal punishment due to sins whose guilt has already been forgiven. An indulgence is partial or plenary according as it removes either part or all of the temporal punishment due to sin." Now, for those non-Catholics out there, or those who might just be confused, an indulgence is not something that saves somebody. If somebody isn't already on their way to heaven on account of their faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross, an indulgence is not going to do them any good. Rather, an indulgence takes care of a part of the payment for sin that is not covered simply by being forgiven. Now, if you're Protestant, especially if you're evangelical, that last sentence may not make any sense at all. So let me try to give an analogy that will help explain. Suppose I'm in my backyard and I'm throwing the ball with my son, and I accidentally throw a little bit too hard and it flies over the fence and breaks my neighbor's window. Now, if that happened, I would probably run right over, make sure everybody was okay, and apologize profusely to my neighbor because I want our relationship to be good. And if it isn't, I want it to be restored. And if my neighbor is a merciful and loving neighbor, they would accept that apology and say, "Oh, okay, it's all right, you're forgiven." But if I just turned around at that point and walked back to my house and forgot the whole thing happened, there would still be a bit of an issue, namely the broken window. Now, if I am truly sorry and truly repentant, I'm going to offer to pay to have that window replaced. Not because I'm trying to gain forgiveness from my neighbor by giving them money, but because it's just the right thing to do. And not only is it the right thing to do to help my neighbor out for the window that I broke, but it's good for me. Because when I pay them for that window, I'm showing my true sorrow, I'm showing that I am taking responsibility for my actions, and I, myself, grow in virtue. Now, the problem is, human beings are extremely imperfect. We fall down and make mistakes and sin pretty much every day of our lives. And what that does is it kind of builds up an accrual of punishment that we have actually earned. Now, God can forgive sins instantly. We can't earn that forgiveness by doing anything, but forgiveness and punishment can still go together. So for example, when my kids act up, the instant they say they're sorry and stop doing what they're doing, I forgive them and our relationship is completely restored. But that doesn't mean that there's no consequence. Why? Because I want them to grow in virtue, and that's not going to happen if all they have to do is say sorry and then we go about our business. So how this all works out is that in the church's view of the afterlife, heaven is the presence of God. It is for people that believe in, trust, and love Him. Hell is the place for those who do not. And then there is Purgatory. Now, Purgatory is not a third place that people can go after death. Heaven and hell are the only two possible destinations, ultimately. However, on the way to heaven, imperfect people need to get cleaned up and perfected. You come into a beautiful, nice house, all dirty. You want a place to clean up before you get into the actual house. Now, being allowed in the house requires having a relationship with the owner of the house. You don't get into the house if you're not in a good relationship with the owner. However, that doesn't mean that they're not going to want you to get cleaned up before you drag mud all over the carpet. So Purgatory is kind of the mudroom of heaven. It's not necessarily a place. It's purgation. It's purging. It's getting rid of that sin that is still sort of stuck to me. And an indulgence is a declaration of the church that some or all of that suffering that goes on during this purging of the sin from my life, it's already been taken care of in this life. So, if an indulgence is plenary, that means that all of the payment, all of the suffering, all of the cleanup has been taken care of. And if it's not quite plenary, it's partial. What does any of this have to do with the Camino?
Get on with it!
Well, back in the 12th century, an indulgence was granted to pilgrims who went to the Holy Land. And because that was a very dangerous journey, if you died on the way to the Holy Land, it was considered a plenary indulgence. And eventually these kinds of indulgences started getting attached to other pilgrimages, namely the one in Santiago, Spain. So if you visit the cathedral and the tomb of St. James in a holy year and you fulfill the other requirements, then you could get a plenary indulgence. When July 25th, the saint day for St. James the Greater, falls on a Sunday, that's considered a holy year. You can receive the plenary indulgence for visiting the cathedral on any day. Now, if you can't make it on July 25th, you can also go on April 21st, which is the feast of the dedication of the cathedral, or on December 30th, which is the feast of the transfer of St. James' remains to Galicia. Now, all that to say this, the requirements for the plenary indulgence have to do with making pilgrimage to the cathedral in Santiago. And the pilgrimage and the Camino are two different things. If you make the visit to the cathedral in Santiago, visit the remains of St. James, and fulfill the other requirements for a plenary indulgence in a holy year or on one of the feast days, a plenary indulgence is available to you, but this has nothing to do with walking the Camino. I think the confusion arises because, as most Camino pilgrims know, in order to get your Compostela, that is your certificate of completion for the Camino, you have to walk at least the last 100 kilometers into Santiago. However, this is not required for the indulgence. It is not attached to the Camino, it is attached to the visit. So even though the visit is called a pilgrimage, and the Camino is often called a pilgrimage, they don't have to be the same pilgrimage. So there is actually no such thing as a Camino indulgence. There is no indulgence attached to walking the Camino. There is an indulgence attached to making pilgrimage to the Santiago Cathedral at certain times a year or during a holy year, the next one of which, by the way, will be 2021. I hope this video has helped you out in your preparations for your Camino. If it has, please give the video a like, and if you are into Camino stuff, think about subscribing to the channel. Just click that big red button and click the bell if you also want to be notified whenever new videos come out. Until then, I'm Doug. Buen Camino.